Hey everyone, today we're plunging into a landscape where the very earth has been torn open, where craters fill with rain and blood, and the stench of rotting flesh never truly fades. You won't hear the clash of swords or cavalry charges here. Instead, only the endless thunder of artillery turning men to fragments, the hiss of flamethrowers in the dark, and the quiet sobs of soldiers drinking their own urine to stay alive. This isn't about maps and maneuvers. This is about the longest meat grinder of the Great War. A place where forests vanished under fire, hills became graveyards, and men were reduced to shadows of their former selves. If you crave unflinching tales of humanity ground into mud and madness, hit like and subscribe. And in the comments, tell me, where are you watching from, and what memory of war's futility still lingers with you now. Steady yourself, and follow me into Verdun, the furnace that devoured a generation. You stand here, in the cold, pre-dawn quiet of February 21st, 1916. The world around you is still, hushed in these final moments before dawn. You breathe in the biting chill of the winter air, perhaps catching the faint scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. A tension hangs in the air, a stillness that feels heavy, almost expectant. You might hear the quiet rustle of your own uniform, the gentle shifting of earth beneath your worn boots. The horizon is a faint, smudged line of gray, promising the reluctant arrival of a new day. But that promise is about to be shattered. Then it begins, not with a bang, but with a deep, resonant rumble that vibrates through the very ground beneath you. It starts as a low growl, like a distant, angry beast, rapidly swelling into an overwhelming, all-encompassing roar. You feel it first in your feet, a tremor rising through your legs, then your chest, until your entire body becomes a vessel for the earth's violent convulsions. The sound isn't just heard, it's felt, a physical blow to your very core. 1,200 German guns, stretching across miles, have opened their throats simultaneously. The air instantly fills with a cacophony unlike anything you have ever known. It's the sound of thunder, multiplied 1,000 times, unending and relentless. The sky, still dark, flashes with brilliant, blinding light, not the gentle glow of sunrise, but the stark, white-hot glare of countless explosions. Shells, an unimaginable number, begin to fall. You can almost feel the air tearing apart as they scream overhead, each one a harbinger of destruction, a miniature earthquake waiting to erupt. The ground around you writhes, bucking and heaving like an agitated ocean. Trenches, once sturdy earthworks, crumble before your eyes, walls collapsing inward, the very structure of the ground dissolving into a churned mess of mud, rock, and splintered wood. You might see a section of a trench, just yards from you, simply vanish, swallowed by the earth as if it never existed. The air becomes thick with dust and pulverized earth, a gritty, suffocating cloud that fills your lungs and stings your eyes. The acrid, metallic smell of cordite is overwhelming, mingling with the stench of freshly turned soil and something else, something darker, a hint of destruction. You are deafened, your ears ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowns out all other thought. Your vision blurs, obscured by swirling debris and constant, blinding flashes. You stumble, struggling to keep your footing as the world literally shakes beneath you. Men near you, moments ago solid companions, are flung about like rag dolls, their forms indistinct in the dust. Some are simply swallowed by the collapsing earth. buried alive, their last desperate struggles muffled by tons of mud. You might hear faint, terrified cries, quickly extinguished as the ground claims its victims. Those who survive the immediate onslaught emerge from the wreckage like specters, their faces caked in mud, eyes wide and staring, blank with shock, half blind, their vision impaired by the dust and blinding flashes. They stumble forward, disoriented, their minds shattered by the sheer, sustained violence. Some reach out, hands bleeding as they claw at the earth, desperate to free comrades, or perhaps simply to understand what is happening. This is not a battle. It's the deliberate tearing apart of the world you knew, and you sense, with chilling certainty, that this apocalypse, this unholy storm of steel and fire, has only just begun. It will not end soon. The roar of the artillery, though constant, eventually fades into a background hum in your mind. A perpetual vibration that has replaced silence. You find yourself huddled in a shell crater, a raw, gaping wound in the earth. It's not just you. 8 other men are crammed in, pressed shoulder to shoulder, knees to chests, in a space meant for perhaps 1 or 2. The earth around you is still soft, pulverized by the relentless bombardment, a gritty mixture of dirt and what you try not to think about. You taste the dust on your tongue, a dry, metallic flavor that seems to scrape at the back of your throat. The immediate terror of shells passing overhead is replaced by a gnawing, deeper fear, the fear of discovery, of movement, of what lies just beyond the edges of this muddy sanctuary. No one dares to move. Every twitch, every rustle, feels like a monumental risk, a beacon to the unseen enemy crawling through the churned landscape. You can feel the heat radiating from the bodies pressed against yours, a strange comfort in shared misery, yet also a source of growing discomfort in the confined space. Thirst becomes a torment. Your throat is parched, your lips cracked and raw. The water in your canteen, if you even have any, has long since run out or been contaminated by the deluge of earth. Desperation sets in, a primal urge that overrides all other instincts. You watch as others, and eventually, you too, resort to the unthinkable. With a profound sense of shame and necessity, you collect your own urine, warm and bitter, and drink it. It's a moment of utter degradation, yet also a stark testament to the will to survive, to cling to the fragile thread of life. The taste is foul, but it offers a momentary, deceptive relief. The confines of the shell hole become a microcosm of hell. Basic human functions, usually private, are now performed with a horrifying lack of dignity. When dysentery inevitably sets in, a wave of sickness sweeping through the ranks, there is nowhere to go. Men defecate into their backpacks, or worse, into cupped hands, the waste mingling with the mud and grime. The stench is overpowering, a suffocating blend of human waste, stagnant water, and the metallic tang of dried blood. It clings to your clothes, your skin, your very being. You can almost feel it permeating your pores, becoming a part of you. And then there are the dead. They're not distant. They are your companions in this wretched existence. Corpses lie beside you, half buried, their forms grotesque and twisted. Some are comrades you knew, others anonymous casualties of the opening barrage. Flies, thick and buzzing, swarm over them, a constant, sickening hum that fills the air. The smell of rotting flesh, sweet and cloying, is pervasive, a constant reminder of life's fragility and the ever-present shadow of death. It's a smell you will never forget, one that will forever be etched into your memory. Beyond the shell hole, the trenches, where they still exist, are no better. Latrines, hastily dug and poorly maintained, overflow, their contents mixing with mud and rainwater, turning the pathways into cesspools. You navigate this foul landscape, each step a squelch through viscous muck. You try to avoid looking too closely, to numb yourself to the horror, but the reality is inescapable. One soldier, scrawling a desperate message in a moment of clarity, perhaps in a brief lull in the shelling, captured the essence of it all. His words echo in your mind, a quiet lament amidst the chaos. This is not war, this is a massacre. And you know, with every fiber of your being, that he speaks the absolute truth. You are not fighting, you are simply enduring, simply surviving, in a landscape designed for annihilation. 4 days have passed since the initial thunder, yet the earth still seems to groan beneath your feet, a low, persistent echo of the great bombardment. Word begins to filter through the shattered lines, carried on the wind like a whisper of disbelief. Then a roar of shame. Douaumont, Fort Douaumont. The name rings with pride in French ears, a symbol of impregnability, a colossal concrete and steel guardian of Verdun. You might have seen it from a distance, a formidable structure, silent and brooding on the horizon, its very presence a comfort. To imagine it falling was unthinkable. Yet, it has fallen. Only 4 days after the first shell landed. On February 25th, the Germans stormed it. The news spreads like a fever, leaving behind a bitter taste. You picture the immense, silent corridors of the fort, its thick concrete walls designed to withstand the heaviest shells. But when the Germans breached it, they found something unexpected, an eerie quiet, an almost hollow emptiness. Only a handful of French defenders were stationed within, a skeletal crew, perhaps 50 or 60 souls, meant to maintain the fort, not to defend it against a full-scale assault. They were a token force, an oversight in the great, complex web of defenses. The Germans, emboldened by their relentless shelling, pushed forward, expecting a furious resistance, a brutal fight for every yard of concrete. Instead, they met with little more than a whisper of opposition. A few desperate shots, a brief, futile skirmish, and then silence. The fort, this immense pride of France, fell almost without a fight. It was not a grand tactical victory for the Germans, not one earned through superior strategy or overwhelming force in that specific moment. It was a gift, unwrapped in the smoke and chaos of the opening days. Across the lines, in Germany, the church bells pealed. You might imagine the sound, carried on the wind, a distant, triumphant chime reaching even to your muddy, desperate corner of the world. It was a sound of celebration, of victory, a proclamation of their rapid advance. For them, it was a sign, a prophecy of swift success, an early crown jewel in their campaign. You can almost feel the surge of pride and confidence that must have swept through their ranks, a sharp contrast to the sinking feeling in your own gut. Here, in France, it was a national humiliation, a wound, deep and festering, inflicted not by superior force, but by a combination of a brutal opening attack and a critical oversight. The news resonated through every trench, every shell hole, every weary soul. It became a personal affront. You felt it as a sting, a blow to your collective pride, a betrayal of the very ground you were fighting for. Douaumont was not just a fort. It was a symbol, a beacon of French strength. Its fall was a symbolic surrender of something vital. And this, you realize, changed everything. Verdun was no longer simply a position on a map, a strategic objective to be held or taken. It was no longer just a line on a trench map, a series of coordinates. With the fall of Douaumont, Verdun became France itself. It became the very heart and soul of the nation, a place where honor was to be defended at all costs, where the soil was soaked with the essence of French identity. To lose Verdun now, to concede another inch of this blood-soaked ground, would be to lose a piece of your country, a piece of yourself. The fight, already grim, now carried an unbearable weight of national destiny. This small, empty fort had transformed a tactical struggle into an existential battle. The bitter taste of Douaumont's fall still lingers, a constant reminder of vulnerability. But then, a new presence begins to ripple through the shattered lines. A different kind of energy, General Philippe Pétain. His name is spoken with quiet reverence, a hint of cautious hope. Unlike the generals who seem to throw men into impossible attacks with reckless abandon, Pétain is different. He's described as a man of defense, methodical, focused on the steady preservation of life rather than the pursuit of costly, fleeting advances. His arrival is like a calming hand settling on a fevered brow, a quiet promise of order amidst the chaos. You sense his influence almost immediately. There's a shift, a new rhythm to the desperate struggle. Pétain begins to weave a new tapestry of defense across the devastated landscape. He organizes the remaining trenches, those that haven't been swallowed by the earth, into a more cohesive network. New bunkers, deep and sturdy, are planned and constructed amidst the shell-scarred terrain. He orchestrates the placement of artillery, not in isolated batteries, but in a web of interlocking fire, each gun supporting the next, creating zones of lethal crossfire that will shred any attacking force. It feels like the earth itself is being slowly, painstakingly rebuilt, transformed from a wasteland into a fortress, a giant, intricate spiderweb designed to ensnare the enemy. The lifeline of Verdun, the very pulse that keeps this dying effort alive, is the road, la voie sacrée, they call it, the sacred way. It's the only supply road into Verdun, a narrow artery stretching back miles, funneling everything needed for survival and combat into this inferno. You might stand beside it, a ghost in the swirling dust, watching the endless procession, thousands upon thousands of trucks, their engines droning like a perpetual swarm of giant insects, churn up the road day and night. Their headlights pierce the darkness like a silent, determined procession, carrying men, ammunition, food, water, the very breath of life to the front. Beside them, thousands of road workers toil tirelessly, their bodies silhouetted against the rising dust and the dim light of dawn or dusk. They patch craters, fill ruts, mend the road with an almost sacred dedication, ensuring that the flow of supplies never ceases, not for a moment. It's a monumental feat of logistics, a testament to human will, an unbroken chain of effort connecting the front to the distant, quieter world behind. You can almost feel the rhythmic vibration of the trucks, the quiet determination of the workers, a steady pulse in the heart of the storm. Peytin's true genius, perhaps, lies in his understanding of the human spirit. He knows that no man, no matter how brave, can withstand the relentless, soul-destroying horror of Verdun indefinitely. So he institutes a policy of constant rotation. Divisions, weary and shattered, are pulled from the front lines and replaced by fresh ones, offering a fleeting glimpse of relief, a chance to breathe, to rest, to briefly remember what it means to be human away from the immediate jaws of death. You might be among those rotated, feeling the profound relief of leaving the immediate hellscape, even if you know you will return. This constant ebb and flow of men, a human tide, prevents the complete collapse of morale, keeping the fragile flame of hope flickering. And then there's his rallying cry, a phrase that sweeps through the ranks like wildfire, whispered from man to man, growing into a defiant roar. Ils ne passeront pas. They shall not pass. You hear it, feel it in your bones. It's not a boast, not a jingoistic shout. It's a quiet, profound declaration of unwavering resolve. It's a promise made not just to the nation, but to each other. A shared vow that despite the inferno, despite the suffering, despite the endless grind, Verdun will hold. It's a testament to the quiet, unyielding spirit that Pétain fosters. A spirit of endurance that promises, with grim certainty, that here, on this desecrated ground, the line will be held. The relentless, grinding battle begins to shift, its hungry maw turning towards the high ground, the twin bastions of Fort Douaumont and Côte 304, Dead Man's Hill. The name alone sends a chill through your bones, a premonition of the horrors that await. You can almost feel the elevation change beneath your feet as you move towards these hills, the ground becoming steeper, the air thinner, filled with the dust of constant destruction. These aren't merely hills, they are ancient, sacred ground, now slated to become the grandest, most macabre graveyard imaginable. Every yard of ground here becomes a currency, bought with an incomprehensible toll of human lives. You imagine the desperate charges, the frantic defenses, the bodies piling up, each one a testament to an inch of dirt gained or lost. Thousands upon thousands of lives are consumed, devoured by the insatiable appetite of the battlefield, a silent sacrifice for a few feet of blasted earth. The landscape itself becomes a testament to this voracious consumption. Where once there were forests, stands of ancient, proud trees that whispered secrets in the wind, now there is only desolation. The artillery has blasted them into blackened stumps, jagged teeth jutting from the scarred earth. You see these stumps, stark and lifeless, like skeletal fingers reaching up from a forgotten grave. All memory of green and vibrant life erased. The earth itself is cratered, not gently, but violently, pockmarked like the surface of the moon. Each hollow a testament to an explosion, a wound inflicted by monstrous force. The ground is churned, soft and yielding underfoot, a gruesome mixture of soil, mud, and unspeakable fragments. And within this desolate, moon-like terrain, the most chilling transformation has occurred. Corpses, countless and anonymous, are no longer just bodies lying on the ground. They are integrated into the landscape itself. They pile so high, one upon the other, that they become part of the terrain, forming gruesome ridges and mounds. You might stumble upon them, or even step on them without realizing, as they are now indistinguishable from the mud and debris. They are silent, unmoving sentinels, silent witnesses to the ongoing slaughter. The smell, a sweet, sickly stench of decay, hangs heavy in the air, a constant companion that seeps into your very clothes, becoming a part of you. Those who survive the ceaseless horror of these hills are changed fundamentally. You look into their eyes, or perhaps feel your own eyes mirroring their emptiness, and see no light, no spark of recognition. Their gazes are blank, unfocused, staring out at a world that has ceased to make sense. They have seen too much, endured too much. Life has been drained from them, leaving behind only the hollow shell of a man. They move with a slow, deliberate grace. Like living statues, their bodies animated, but their spirits long since departed. You watch them, these silent, broken figures, and you realize that these hills, Morham and Côte 304, have not just consumed bodies, they have devoured souls, leaving behind only the profound, haunting silence of the land of bones. June arrives, bringing with it a fleeting promise of warmth, but no reprieve from the relentless fighting. The German focus narrows once more, turning its destructive gaze towards another formidable strongpoint, Fort Vaux. You might hear the distant rumble of shells intensifying in that direction, a clear signal that something terrible is unfolding. The fort, a sibling to Douaumont, a labyrinth of concrete and steel, becomes a crucible, a contained inferno where the fight descends into a more intimate, more terrifying hell. The Germans, encircling the fort, began to pound it with relentless artillery. But the true horror unfolds inside, within the dark, echoing tunnels and chambers. You can almost feel the claustrophobia, the oppressive weight of tons of earth and concrete above you. This is no longer open-field combat. It's a desperate, close-quarters struggle in the suffocating darkness. The air inside becomes thick with dust, smoke, and the metallic tang of blood. You imagine the sounds, the muffled thud of grenades detonating in confined spaces, the sharp crack of rifle fire echoing off the stone, the sickening squelch of a knife finding its mark. It's a primal, brutal fight, reduced to man against man in the closest, most terrifying proximity. The most terrifying weapon, however, is the flamethrower. You hear the hiss first, an ominous prelude to a torrent of liquid fire. Imagine the sudden, blinding flash, the immediate wave of intense heat, the smell of burning flesh and melting metal filling the air. There's no escape in these enclosed spaces. The flames leap and coil, licking at every shadow, leaving behind charred remnants and unimaginable agony. It's a weapon designed not just to kill, but to terrorize, to break the spirit with its sheer, overwhelming brutality. But beyond the bullets and the fire, a more insidious enemy begins to claim its victim's thirst. The garrison, trapped within the fort, goes for days without water. Every drop, every precious sip is gone. You feel your throat growing raw, dry, burning. Your lips crack, your tongue swells. The desperation for liquid becomes an unbearable torment, eclipsing even the fear of death. Men resort to drinking foul, stagnant liquid, perhaps from puddles on the floor, water mixed with the grim realities of the fort mud, dust, and chillingly, blood. Each sip is a gamble, a potential gateway to sickness. But the alternative is a slower, more agonizing demise. The days stretch into an eternity of thirst and close combat. The fight is desperate, heroic in its tenacity. But eventually, Human endurance reaches its breaking point. When the French finally surrender, you can almost feel the collective sigh of exhaustion that passes through both sides. It's not a moment of triumph for the Germans, nor one of utter defeat for the French. Instead, a strange, profound respect transcends the brutal conflict. You imagine the scene: the German soldiers, perhaps seeing the gaunt, dehydrated faces of their adversaries, the sheer desperation etched in their eyes, presenting arms in salute. It's a gesture of honor, a recognition of the incredible, almost superhuman courage and suffering endured by the defenders of Fort Vaux. A victory, yes, for the Germans, but it's a hollow one, bought at an immense cost, purchased with fire and an unbearable thirst, leaving behind only the quiet echoes of a terrible struggle. As mid-1916 approaches, the relentless, grinding machine of Verdun continues its work. But the perspective begins to shift, subtly, imperceptibly, for Germany. The initial elation of Douaumont's capture has faded, replaced by a growing, grim realization. Losses are mounting, a steady, horrifying hemorrhage of men that seems to have no end. You can almost hear the quiet calculations being made in distant headquarters, the tally of the fallen growing ever higher, without the promised breakthrough, without the decisive victory that was supposed to justify such a terrible cost. The grand plan, the swift blow to shatter France, has dissolved into a quagmire, a bottomless pit that simply swallows lives. The echoes of this endless struggle reverberate far beyond the shell-scarred fields of Verdun, reaching back into the heart of Germany itself. On the home front, the naval blockades, a silent, invisible siege, are beginning to bite. You imagine the slow tightening of belts, the quiet gnawing of hunger, food riots, fueled by desperation and scarcity, begin to break out in cities, small fissures appearing in the facade of national unity. The reality of war, once a distant, glorious adventure, is now a cold, empty plate on the table, a gnawing emptiness in the stomachs of civilians. You can almost feel the collective anxiety, the growing weariness among the populace, a stark contrast to the initial fervor. Letters, thin and fragile, make their way from the front lines to anxious families. You can almost feel the weight of these letters. Imagine the trembling hands that open them. They're not filled with tales of glory or brave deeds. Instead, they paint a stark, unvarnished picture of a different kind of war. 18-year-old soldiers, boys barely out of school, scrawl desperate lines describing a reality that would turn a stomach. They write of the constant irritation of lice, tiny, creeping horrors that infest their hair, their uniforms, their very skin. They speak of the pervasive stench of unwashed bodies and the grim reality of blood-soaked clothes. The crimson stains a constant reminder of the violence that surrounds them. You can almost hear the quiet resignation in their voices as you read their words. A sense of deep, ingrained weariness that permeates every syllable. Verdun, you realize, has become something monstrous. It's no longer just a battle. It's an entity, a terrifying void that consumes everything thrown into it. It has become a bottomless pit, its gaping maw swallowing entire generations of young men, devouring their youth, their hopes, their very lives. The constant stream of reinforcements, the endless demand for more bodies, testifies to this insatiable hunger. You can almost feel the collective exhaustion of a nation. The slow, dawning realization that this struggle, this furnace of human sacrifice, is a losing proposition, a draining away of their very essence with no tangible reward in sight. The initial roar of triumph has been replaced by a quiet despair, a growing sense of the futility of it all, as the cost continues to mount, inexorably, with each passing day. As autumn's chill begins to creep into the air in September, a new resolve, a different kind of strength, begins to stir within the French lines. Months of grinding defense, of desperate holding actions under Pétain's steady hand, have forged a new understanding. The French are no longer merely enduring. They are preparing to strike back, methodically, deliberately. You can feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a quiet tightening of muscles, a collective will turning from mere survival to a slow, determined advance. New tactics, forged in the crucible of Verdun's brutal lessons, are implemented. You imagine the practice sessions, the careful coordination, the meticulous planning. One of the most effective is the creeping barrage. Picture it a wall of artillery fire, devastating and precise, moving forward slowly, systematically, just ahead of the advancing infantry. You can almost hear the earth-shattering roar of the shells, the ground trembling underfoot. But this time, there's a sense of purpose to the destruction. It's a shield, a broom sweeping the ground clear of the enemy, protecting the men who follow. And following that moving curtain of fire are waves of infantry, moving forward with a quiet, grim determination. They're not rushing headlong into open fire, but advancing with discipline, knowing that the barrage ahead is clearing their path. You might see them, moving like shadows through the smoke and dust, their faces set, their rifles held steady. This isn't a wild charge. It's a careful, measured advance, a slow, methodical reclaiming of what was lost. Each step forward, each yard gained, feels like a monumental victory, a testament to months of agonizing endurance. Village by village, you imagine the slow, painstaking process of reclamation. You picture what were once quiet hamlets, now reduced to rubble, becoming contested ground, fought over with fierce resolve, house by house, ruin by ruin. The French claw back what was taken. It's not swift, not glorious in the traditional sense, but it is relentless, persistent. The landscape, once given over to the enemy, is slowly, painfully, being brought back under French control, a tiny piece at a time. And then, the quiet triumph of October 24th, the retaking of Douaumont. You remember the sting of its loss, the humiliation? Now, imagine the feeling of seeing the French flag rise again over its scarred ramparts. It's not a celebratory cheer that erupts, but perhaps a collective sigh of quiet relief, a deep satisfaction that sinks into your bones. It's a symbol more than a strategic gain at this point, but its psychological impact is immense. It's a balm for the wounded pride, a quiet vindication of the countless lives lost in its shadow. The momentum continues, a slow, unstoppable tide. In December, as the bitter cold of winter sets in once more, Fort Vaux is retaken. You recall the stories of its siege, the desperate thirst, the horror of the flamethrowers. Now, that memory is replaced by the quiet knowledge that it's back in French hands. It's a testament to the endurance, the refusal to break, the unyielding spirit that has somehow survived the furnace. Verdun, against all odds, against every expectation, remains in French hands. But as you look out over the churned, scarred landscape, the quiet, desolate testament to the fight, you also know, with a profound sense of loss, that this victory, this survival, came at an unimaginable cost. The silence that settles after the brief triumph is heavy, laden with the weight of sacrifice. The fighting has finally, mercifully, subsided. The thunder of the guns, once a constant, deafening presence, has faded into a distant echo, replaced by a quiet that feels almost unnatural. Now, in the aftermath, the full, crushing weight of the cost begins to settle, not as a sudden blow, but as a slow, pervasive ache. You look out over the landscape, once vibrant, now a vast, scarred monument to human suffering, and the numbers begin to form in your mind, whispered like a solemn prayer. For France, the figures are staggering, a chilling testament to the nation's enduring will. Approximately 377,000 casualties. You try to grasp that number, to visualize the faces, the lives behind each digit. Of these, 160,000 men are dead, their bodies forever intertwined with the soil of Verdun. Their voices silenced. Another 210,000 are wounded, their bodies forever marked, their minds forever haunted by what they endured. Each one a son, a brother, a father, a friend. You can almost feel the collective grief, the vast emptiness left behind in thousands of homes across the country. And for Germany, the cost is equally devastating. Mirroring the grim ledger, approximately 336,000 casualties. Of these, 140,000 are dead, their lives extinguished in the relentless pursuit of a breakthrough that never came. Another 190,000 are wounded, sent home broken, carrying the physical and psychological scars of the blood mill. The numbers are so close, so tragically balanced, a horrifying symmetry of suffering. You let the numbers sink in, a silent, heavy weight. Think of the sheer, relentless nature of the casualty rate. On average, for every 2 minutes of those 300 days of battle, one man was killed or wounded. Imagine that constant, unending churn, a life extinguished, a body shattered, every 120 seconds, for 10 months straight. It's a relentless, horrifying rhythm, a silent drumbeat of destruction that underscores the utter futility of the fight. It wasn't a battle with lulls. It was a constant, devouring process. And what was gained strategically? As you stand amidst the desolation, you realize nothing had changed. The lines, after nearly a year of unimaginable bloodshed, remained almost exactly where they began. No grand strategic breakthrough, no decisive victory had been achieved. The maps of Europe remained unaltered by this immense sacrifice. It was a static, grinding war of attrition, a test of will and endurance, and little else. Yet, for France, Verdun was more than a strategic stalemate. It was survival itself. It was the moment where the nation stood on the precipice, where its very soul was tested in the crucible of fire and mud, and it refused to break. It was a testament to an unyielding spirit, a grim determination to hold the line, to protect the very heart of the country from being consumed. You feel the profound weight of this legacy, a quiet pride mingled with an immense sadness. It was not a victory of conquest, but a victory of endurance, a hard-won triumph over annihilation. The silence that follows the counting of the dead is not empty. It is filled with the echoes of sacrifice, a somber quietude that whispers of a nation that held. but paid an unimaginable price. The great, agonizing symphony of destruction at Verdun has faded, leaving behind a silence that is profound, almost sacred. But the legacy of this place, this furnace that devoured a generation, continues to resonate. A quiet hum beneath the surface of history. Verdun has not vanished into the annals of forgotten battles. It has become legend, a word whispered with a mixture of awe and horror. It stands as a powerful symbol, not just of national endurance, of a nation's refusal to break under unimaginable pressure, but also, perhaps more poignantly, of the sheer, unbridled absurdity of industrial war. You imagine the countless stories, untold and unheard, buried within the scarred earth, the survivors, those who managed to crawl out of the abyss, returned home. But they were not the same men who left. You picture their eyes, empty and distant, reflecting the horrors they had witnessed, the part of themselves they had left behind in the mud and blood. They carried the battle within them, a silent burden that would never truly lift. The sounds, the smells, the unspeakable sights, they were etched onto their souls, leaving indelible marks that no amount of time could erase. They walked among the living, but in their minds, they were often still trapped in the desolation of Dead Man's Hill. One soldier, his words echoing across the years, captured the essence of their experience, a stark and brutal truth that transcends time. He wrote, not in a moment of fury, but with the quiet, profound wisdom born of suffering. This was not war. This was slaughter. You hear his voice, calm and resigned, speaking a truth so fundamental it strips away all pretense of glory. It was not a clash of armies in the traditional sense. It was a systematic, industrialized annihilation, a grinding down of human life into mud and fragments. Verdun, even today, asks us a question, a profound query that hangs in the quiet air above its cemeteries and memorials. It asks you, silently, insistently, was this glory, this monumental sacrifice, this enduring against all odds, or was it madness? Was it a noble defense of a nation's soul, or a terrifying descent into an abyss of senseless destruction, where men became mere components in a machine of death? There is no easy answer, only the quiet, unsettling contemplation of its profound cost. And perhaps that is Verdun's most enduring lesson, its final, lingering whisper. It remains a stark, immutable reminder that in the cold, unfeeling calculus of modern war, where technology and industry converge, men are often reduced to nothing more than fuel for the machine. You leave this place, carrying with you the quiet weight of its history, the indelible image of a landscape transformed by human suffering, and the enduring question that will echo in your mind, long after the last sounds of Verdun have faded. In the quiet twilight of the late 1930s, as shadows lengthened across Europe, a pervasive sense of calm, almost a gentle resignation, settled over France. The nation, still bearing the deep, invisible scars of the Great War, truly believed in its own enduring strength. This strength was born not just of military might, but of a profound, collective memory of survival. After all, France had weathered 4 long, brutal years of trench warfare, a conflict that had consumed a generation. Yet from its ashes, France had risen, this enduring spirit, This hard-won victory had woven itself into the very fabric of the national psyche, creating an almost impenetrable belief in its resilience. It was a comforting, yet ultimately perilous, illusion. The most tangible symbol of this confidence, this almost dreamlike sense of security, was the Maginot Line. Picture, if you will, the vast expanse of eastern France, stretching over 280 miles, adorned with an intricate network of concrete bunkers, underground fortresses, and formidable anti-tank obstacles. This wasn't merely a defensive line, it was a psychological bulwark, a silent promise whispered from the heart of the nation to its people. You are safe. Not here, not again. Designed with meticulous precision, the Maginot Line represented the pinnacle of defensive engineering of its time. Its bunkers, buried deep beneath the earth, were veritable underground cities, complete with living quarters, power stations, hospitals, and vast ammunition depots. They were fortresses built for endurance, for comfort even, and for an unwavering belief in their impenetrable nature. Within these subterranean havens, life settled into a peculiar routine. Soldiers, the guardians of this concrete dream, would lounge in their fortified bunkers. The air, cool and dry, would often be thick with the gentle haze of cigarette smoke, mingling with the earthy scent of damp concrete. The soft shuffle of playing cards, the quiet murmur of conversations, the occasional burst of laughter. These were the sounds of a peacetime military, a force convinced that the next war, if it came, would never breach these walls. They were certain, with an almost naive conviction, that history would repeat itself. The last great conflict had seen the enemy funnel through Belgium, bypassing the more heavily fortified Franco-German border. And so, the unspoken agreement seemed to be, it would happen again. The Maginot Line would stand sentinel, inviolable, while the true battle unfolded elsewhere, far from its comforting embrace. Beyond the military outposts, in the vibrant heart of Paris, life carried on with a breathtaking sense of normalcy, almost as if the ominous rumblings of war in distant lands were but a faint echo, easily drowned out by the city's lively rhythm. Cafes, with their polished brass and checkered tablecloths, remained crowded, filled with the cheerful clinking of cups and the animated chatter of patrons. The melodic strains of jazz drifted from radios, weaving through the Parisian air, a defiant soundtrack to an era teetering on the brink. Headlines in newspapers, rather than shrieking alarm, often mocked what was cynically dubbed the phony war or the drôle de guerre. From September 1939, when war was officially declared, through the quiet winter and spring of 1940, there was a strange, almost surreal lull. It was a period of waiting, of unspoken tension. But for many, it felt more like an inconvenience than an existential threat. The belief was deeply ingrained. Hitler, for all his bluster and ambition, would never dare to breach the concrete fortress that was France. This deeply held conviction, this comforting, collective delusion, was perhaps the most dangerous belief of all. It cradled the nation in a false sense of security, blinding it to the possibility of a truly novel and devastating approach. A storm brewing not where it was expected, but from the most unlikely of directions. The quiet illusion, however, was about to shatter with a terrifying abruptness. The date, now etched into the annals of history, was May 10th, 1940. This was not a dawn heralded by the gentle chirping of birds or the soft light of a rising sun. Instead, it arrived with a chilling, mechanical chorus, the distant, then steadily growing, rumble of engines, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very earth itself, and piercing through the crisp morning air. A sound that would soon become synonymous with terror, the high-pitched guttural scream of Stukas, German dive bombers, as they plunged from the sky, their sirens wailing, descending like harbingers of doom above the ancient, shadowed expanse of the Ardennes bonnet forest. The Ardennes. For centuries, this dense, seemingly impenetrable woodland, stretching across parts of Belgium, Luxembourg, and northeastern France, had been considered an insurmountable natural barrier. Its winding, narrow roads, often little more than muddy tracks, its steep ravines, and its thick canopy of trees, all seemed to conspire to render it impassable for any large-scale military operation, especially for mechanized forces. It was a formidable landscape, a natural fortress, a place where, so the strategists believed, an enemy would inevitably become ensnared, trapped in a tangled web of nature's own design. French scouts, vigilant eyes in the early morning mist, were among the first to witness the impossible. Their reports, delivered with urgency and a tremor of disbelief, spoke of endless convoys snaking their way along those very narrow forest roads. The sheer scale of what they were witnessing defied all conventional military wisdom. Tanks, trucks, and countless soldiers, a river of steel and men, were flowing through what was supposed to be an impassable bottleneck. Yet, their warnings, echoing through the rigid corridors of command, were met not with alarm, but with dismissive skepticism. The established doctrine, the ingrained belief, was too strong to be easily shaken. One French general, perhaps echoing the prevailing sentiment of the high command, had famously declared with an air of absolute certainty, "The Ardennes cannot be attacked. The enemy would trap itself there." The very thought of a concentrated assault through such terrain was considered folly, a strategic suicide. But the Germans, under the audacious vision of their strategists, had seen not an obstacle, but an opportunity. Those same narrow roads, once dismissed as impassable bottlenecks, had been meticulously, terrifyingly transformed. They had become the clandestine highways for the Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. This was a new kind of warfare, one that defied the slow, deliberate movements of the past. It relied on speed, surprise, and overwhelming force, and its spearhead was now surging through the very heart of France's perceived invulnerability. The quiet deception was complete. Deep within the reassuring concrete shells of the Maginot Line, the French troops, who had so confidently settled into their routines of cards and cigarettes, remained oblivious. The very air they breathed, perhaps still holding the faint scent of morning coffee and stale tobacco, was oblivious. The gentle hum of their generators, the distant clinking of their mess kits, all these sounds spoke of a quiet peace. They had no idea. No idea that the storm, a whirlwind of steel and fire, had not only arrived, but was already sweeping around them, bypassing their formidable defenses, gathering momentum, and bearing down upon their unsuspecting positions. The whispers of dawn carried not just the promise of a new day, but the terrifying prelude to an unforeseen, devastating reckoning. 3 days later, the storm arrived with devastating force. May 13, 1940 dawned over Sedan, a historic town nestled along the meandering Meuse River, and for its inhabitants and the defending soldiers, it would be a day etched forever as a living hell. From the early hours of morning until nightfall, for 8 relentless hours, The sky above Sedan became a terrifying canvas for destruction. German dive bombers, the dreaded Stukas, screamed down from the heavens, their sirens shrieking like banshees, delivering their payloads with a terrifying precision. Bomb after bomb, wave after wave, hammered the ground, shaking the very foundations of the earth, turning the landscape into a chaotic, dust-choked inferno. The defenders arrayed against this aerial onslaught were a division of undertrained reservists. Picture them a poignant mix of older men, many recalled from the quiet rhythms of civilian life. Their hands perhaps more accustomed to farming tools or ledgers than rifles. And young boys, barely out of their teens, thrust into a nightmare far beyond their youthful comprehension. Their equipment was meager, their training insufficient, their experience virtually non-existent in the face of such modern, mechanized terror. They possessed, as a heartbreaking symbol of their inadequacy, a mere single anti-aircraft gun, a lonely, defiant sentinel against a sky filled with hundreds of metallic predators. Under the ceaseless, pulverizing bombardment, their fragile defenses, both physical and psychological, simply crumbled. The scene on the ground was one of unimaginable chaos and despair. Soldiers, their faces streaked with dust and fear, threw down their rifles, the weight of their impossible task crushing their spirit. The thud of falling bombs, the sickening crunch of collapsing buildings, the acrid smell of burning earth and shattered concrete filled the air. Civilians, caught in the inferno, screamed, their cries of terror lost amidst the roar of engines and explosions. Bridges, vital arteries spanning the Meuse, shook violently under the incessant concussions, each shudder a terrifying harbinger of their potential collapse, threatening to sever what little order remained. The very ground seemed to vibrate with the agony of a nation under siege. Then came the truly bewildering, almost surreal, moments that underscored the depth of France's strategic unraveling. While the aerial bombardment was intended to break the spirit, the ground assault that followed exposed a shocking vulnerability. A mere 11 German soldiers, navigating the river in flimsy rubber boats, managed to capture 7 heavily fortified French bunkers. This was not a feat of overwhelming force, but one of audacious opportunism, exploiting the sheer paralysis and confusion that gripped the French lines. It was a moment of profound imbalance. This small band of determined men achieved what, under normal circumstances, should have been an impossible task. A single, well-placed French artillery battery, operating with composure and clear command, could have stopped this crossing cold, turning the tide of this localized, yet monumentally significant, engagement. But that composure was gone. That command structure fractured. The spirit of resistance, for that terrible moment, had evaporated under the relentless pounding. By nightfall, the grim reality had settled like a shroud over Sedan. The crucial Meuse crossing, a strategic linchpin, was lost. This was not merely a territorial defeat. It was a psychological catastrophe. With the loss of that vital river crossing, something far more precious, far more intangible, was also lost. France's morale. It seeped away like blood from an open wound, leaving behind a profound sense of helplessness and despair. The invincibility France had so long clung to had been exposed as a fragile, paper-thin illusion, and the reverberations of Sedan would echo far beyond the shattered landscape of the Meuse, hastening the collapse of a nation. In the aftermath of the Sedan nightmare, an almost unbelievable opportunity presented itself to the French command. a fleeting chance to halt the German advance and perhaps even turn the tide. For a crucial period, the German forces, having poured through the Ardennes, found themselves in a precarious position. Thousands of their vehicles, a vast, snaking procession of tanks, trucks, and supply convoys, were jammed into the narrow choke points of the very forest they had just traversed. They were, in essence, sitting ducks, exposed, vulnerable, and in many places, unable to maneuver or deploy effectively. A rapid, decisive counterattack, launched with even a fraction of France's considerable military might, could have inflicted crippling losses, perhaps even encircling and destroying large portions of the German spearhead. The strategic window was open, if only for a brief, agonizing moment. But instead of seizing this golden opportunity, instead of unleashing the concentrated power that still resided within their vast army, the French High Command dithered. The silence of indecision, the hushed whispers of argument, filled the air in their headquarters, a stark contrast to the roar of German engines. Precious hours, then days, slipped away. Arguments raged over strategy, over troop deployments, over the very nature of the threat. The rigid, methodical thinking that had defined their military doctrine for decades proved to be their undoing. They were trained for a slow, linear war, a war of attrition and fixed defenses. The lightning speed of the Blitzkrieg had not only overwhelmed their front lines, but had paralyzed their decision-making process. The very idea of a rapid, fluid counteroffensive against such a dynamic, unconventional enemy was alien to their established playbook, and they simply could not adapt. Meanwhile, at the front lines, the weary French troops, many still reeling from the shock of Sedan, waited. They waited for orders, for reinforcements, for the cavalry that seemed destined to arrive. Their eyes scanned the horizon, hoping to see the familiar dust clouds of their own armored divisions, ready to engage the enemy and push them back. But what they saw, instead, were new dust clouds, rising ominously in the distance. These were not the signs of their own approaching relief. No, these were the dust clouds of advancing panzers, the unstoppable German tanks, their metallic forms growing larger, more menacing, with every passing moment. The enemy was not being contained. They were relentlessly advancing, exploiting every second of French indecision. The psychological toll of this paralysis was immense. Imagine the crushing despair of seeing help not arrive, of realizing that the very forces meant to defend you were caught in a bureaucratic tangle of their own making. This slow, agonizing unraveling culminated in a moment of profound despair at headquarters. The weight of the unfolding disaster, the realization that their meticulously laid plans had been rendered utterly irrelevant by the brutal speed of the German attack, became too much for one French general. In a moment of raw, unvarnished emotion, he broke down in tears, the very embodiment of a nation's crumbling spirit. His voice, thick with grief and disbelief, uttered the chilling words that would echo for generations. We have lost. It was a confession born not of cowardice, but of a terrifying, lucid understanding that the battle, perhaps even the war, was already beyond salvation, stolen not by overwhelming force alone, but by a catastrophic failure of will and a paralyzing inability to adapt to the terrifying speed of a new kind of war. The opportunity had vanished, leaving only the bitter taste of regret and the relentless grind of defeat. The words, "We have lost," uttered in that moment of despair, were not merely a surrender to emotion. They were a chilling premonition of the reality that unfolded across France. The German columns, now unchecked, surged west with the terrifying, unstoppable force of a storm. This was Blitzkrieg in its purest, most devastating form. A lightning war that shredded not only physical lines of defense, but, more profoundly, the very will to resist. Commanders like Erwin Rommel epitomized this new doctrine, pushing their forces with a relentless fury that defied conventional military wisdom. Rommel's division, for instance, covered an astonishing 100 miles in a single day, a pace that was unimaginable to the French and British forces, accustomed as they were to the slow, grinding advances of previous wars. For the French soldiers caught in the path of this relentless surge, the speed was utterly stunning, almost hallucinatory. One moment, the enemy was reported to be in one location, a distant threat. The next, they were on your doorstep. The bewilderment was palpable, articulated in the disbelieving whispers among exhausted troops. Yesterday, they were at Sedan. Today, they are at Amiens. It was as if the very geography of France was collapsing in on itself, compressed by the sheer velocity of the German advance. Roads that had been quiet country lanes suddenly thrummed with the ceaseless roar of tanks and trucks. Villages that had known generations of peace were now engulfed in the chaos of battle. Then just as quickly, left behind in the dust, the enemy already far beyond. This wasn't just a military tactic. It was a psychological weapon of unparalleled effectiveness. Blitzkrieg wasn't merely breaking through defensive lines. It was shattering the very mental framework of resistance. Imagine the relentless exhaustion, the constant fear of being outflanked, surrounded, or simply run over. Imagine the feeling of fighting a ghost, an enemy that seemed to materialize from nowhere, strike with devastating force, and then vanish over the horizon, only to reappear further down the road, closer to your home. This relentless pressure, this feeling of being constantly outmaneuvered and overwhelmed, eroded morale like a persistent, insidious acid. The sensory overload of this new warfare was immense. The drone of distant aircraft, a constant, low thrum that promised unseen dangers, the jarring rumble of panzer tracks on cobbled roads, a sound that spoke of immediate, overwhelming threat, the acrid smell of burning fuel and gunpowder, mixed with the sweat of fear, the sight of endless columns of gray-clad soldiers and steel machines, an implacable tide washing over the landscape. These sensory details combined to create an atmosphere of profound disorientation and helplessness. The psychological impact went deeper than just fear. It fostered a sense of futility if the enemy could move so fast, if they could appear in unexpected places, if every defensive position was simply bypassed or overrun with terrifying ease. Then what was the point of fighting? This question, whispered in weary bivouacs and in the silent despair of retreating columns, began to take root. The will to resist, once a fierce and proud flame, began to flicker, threatened by the gale-force winds of overwhelming speed and relentless pressure. The terrifying rapidity of the Blitzkrieg was not just winning battles. It was winning the war by dismantling the very spirit of the defenders, turning a proud nation's resolve into a quiet, resigned acceptance of the inevitable. As the relentless tide of Blitzkrieg swept across France, an already dire situation was compounded by a deeply unfortunate truth. The Allied leaders, bound by a shared enemy but divided by suspicion and differing priorities, simply could not forge the cohesive response needed to confront this new form of warfare. British, French, and Belgian leaders, often meeting under immense pressure and in an atmosphere of escalating crisis, found themselves locked in a frustrating dance of distrust and miscommunication. Old grievances, national interests, and conflicting military doctrines created fissures in what should have been an unbreakable wall of unity. The very foundations of the coalition, essential for facing such a formidable adversary, were cracking under the strain. Amidst this chaos, there emerged a rare, fleeting moment of hope. A glimpse of what might have been if unity and decisiveness had prevailed. At Arras, a town in northern France, a counterattack was launched, a combined Allied effort. It was a bold, if limited, thrust, designed to strike at the exposed flank of Rommel's furiously advancing division. For a time, it succeeded. This unexpected assault, delivered with a rare ferocity, genuinely rattled Rommel. His forces, operating at the extreme limits of their supply lines and momentum, suddenly found themselves facing stiff resistance. The attack cost him tanks, precious armor that could ill afford to be lost, and momentarily disrupted the seemingly unstoppable German flow. It was a tangible success, a small but significant crack in the facade of German invincibility. Imagine the tension in those moments, the fierce engagement, the momentary feeling of pushing back, the hope that flared briefly in the hearts of the Allied soldiers. This was the precise instant to press the advantage, to reinforce the success, to transform a localized counterattack into a broader, more decisive operation. The opportunity was there, hanging in the balance, beckoning for audacious action. But instead of seizing this critical window, instead of pooling their resources and launching a full-scale follow-up, commanders on both sides hesitated. The French, reeling from the psychological shock of the Ardennes and Sedan, were wary of committing precious reserves. The British, perhaps with an eye already turning towards the defense of their own island, were cautious, hesitant to risk more. The arguments over strategy, the questions of who would lead and who would commit what, continued to paralyze decisive action. The fleeting moment of tactical success was squandered amidst indecision and internal friction. The last chance, the crucial opportunity to deliver a crippling blow to the German advance and potentially alter the course of the campaign, slipped away, like sand through cupped fingers. The outcome of Arras, a testament to what a unified Allied effort could achieve, also became a tragic symbol of their disunity. The German forces, momentarily staggered, quickly recovered. The window of vulnerability closed, and the relentless advance resumed its terrifying pace. The fractures within the Allied coalition, exposed by the crucible of battle, proved to be as detrimental as any German tank division. In the chaotic maelstrom of 1940, with the survival of nations hanging by a thread, the inability of the Allied powers to act as one, to overcome their internal divisions and seize a critical opportunity, sealed the fate of France and fundamentally shaped the brutal chapters that were yet to unfold. As the German tide surged westward, outflanking and encircling vast Allied forces, a desperate and unprecedented drama unfolded on the northern coast of France. Hundreds of thousands of men, British, French, and Belgian, found themselves trapped, their backs to the churning waters of the English Channel. They crowded the beaches around Dunkirk, a crescent of sand stretching miles, transformed into a makeshift, sprawling waiting room for destiny. The air was thick with the dust of constant bombardment, the acrid smell of smoke, and the palpable tension of desperation. Overhead, German bombs fell like relentless rain, each explosion sending plumes of sand and shrapnel into the sky, forcing men to scatter, to dive for what little cover they could find. The sky above was a canvas of terror, dotted with the black smudges of anti-aircraft fire and the dark silhouettes of attacking aircraft. In this crucible of fear and uncertainty, difficult decisions had to be made, decisions that would leave a lasting legacy of resentment and a deep sense of abandonment for many. As the Royal Navy and a flotilla of civilian boats, the legendary little ships, began the heroic evacuation, a bitter truth became evident. Prioritizing the British Expeditionary Force, an unspoken but undeniable directive took hold. French troops, many of whom had fought valiantly and were equally trapped, watched with heavy hearts as British soldiers boarded ships first. The sight of their allies departing, while they remained stranded on the bomb-battered beaches, bred a profound sense of betrayal. It was a moment of stark realization in this desperate fight for survival. It seemed some lives were deemed more immediately salvageable than others. The feeling of being left behind, of being a sacrificial rear guard, was a wound that would fester long after the last ship had sailed. The miracle of Dunkirk, as it would come to be known, was indeed a staggering logistical achievement. In the span of just over a week, from late May into early June, an astonishing 340,000 men were evacuated from the beaches and the harbor, ferried across the treacherous channel to the relative safety of Britain. It was a testament to courage, improvisation, and the sheer tenacity of countless individuals. However, for all its miraculous scope, the evacuation was not complete, and its cost was not evenly distributed. Amidst the chaos and the desperate rush, approximately 35,000 French soldiers, a significant portion of those trapped, were ultimately left behind on the beaches. Their fate, unlike that of their evacuated comrades, was grim. They watched, powerless, as the last ships pulled away, leaving them to face the inevitable. As the German forces finally swept into the area, these abandoned soldiers were rounded up. Their resistance exhausted, their hope evaporated. They were marched away, long columns of weary, defeated men, into a future of captivity, destined for prisoner of war camps in Germany. The sands of Dunkirk, once alive with the desperate hope of escape, became for them the grim stage for surrender and the beginning of a long, uncertain confinement. The memory of those beaches and the choices made upon them would forever cast a long, complex shadow over the Allied relationship, a testament to the brutal compromises and heart-wrenching realities of war. The fall of Dunkirk and the subsequent rapid advance of the German forces brought the war to the very heart of France, to its shimmering capital, Paris. On June 10th, a date forever etched in the collective memory of a nation, the unthinkable happened. The French government, facing the immediate threat of occupation and the collapse of all organized defense, made the agonizing decision to flee the capital. It was a move born of strategic necessity, to preserve a semblance of sovereign authority. But to the citizens of Paris, it felt like an ultimate abandonment, a poignant symbol of a war irrevocably lost. The bustling corridors of power emptied. The official vehicles streamed out, leaving behind a city grappling with a profound sense of uncertainty and impending doom. Days later, the silence that had settled over the city was broken, not by the sounds of liberation, but by the ominous rumble of invading forces. Parisians, many of whom had remained, either by choice or necessity, gathered in grim silence. They watched, their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief, sorrow, and a quiet, profound humiliation. As German tanks rolled majestically past the iconic Arc de Triomphe, this magnificent monument, a symbol of French military triumph and national pride, now bore silent witness to its country's darkest hour. The iron crosses emblazoned on the tanks, the crisp precision of the goose-stepping soldiers, the guttural commands barked in a foreign tongue. All of it was a stark, brutal reality. The vibrant, luminous essence of Paris, so long known as the City of Light, was extinguished in that moment. The joyous chatter of its cafes, the carefree strolls along the Seine, the vibrant intellectual discourse that had defined its very soul, all of it fell silent. The city that had inspired artists, writers, and lovers for centuries now became a city of occupation. Its elegant avenues, once pathways of fashion and freedom, were now patrolled by armed soldiers. Its public spaces, once buzzing with life, were now sites of silent humiliation. The very air seemed to thicken with a pervasive sense of subjugation. Imagine the profound shift in the rhythms of daily life. The sudden curfews, the omnipresent propaganda posters, the constant fear of arbitrary arrest, the scarcity of food and basic necessities, the familiar boulangerie, once overflowing with fresh bread, now had dwindling supplies and long queues. The quiet rustle of newspapers, once filled with political debates, now carried censored news and official directives. Life became a careful dance of quiet endurance, of small acts of defiance, of whispered conversations in shadowed doorways. The occupiers, swift and efficient, began to impose their authority. The city's famous landmarks became symbols of foreign control. Draped with the swastika flag, the vibrant cultural life, though suppressed, never truly died, retreating into underground whispers and clandestine gatherings. But for the vast majority, the public face of Paris was one of profound quietness, a stark contrast to its previous ebullience. It was a city stripped of its voice, its laughter muted, its spirit forced into silent, often painful, hibernation. The grandeur of its past stood in stark, almost unbearable contrast to the quiet suffering of its present. The City of Light, though physically still standing, had, for a time, fallen into a deep and sorrowful shadow. As the dust of the swift German conquest settled, France, once a proud and unified nation, found itself cruelly cleaved in two, a physical and ideological schism imposed by the victorious occupiers. The northern half of the country, including the vital industrial regions and the grand capital of Paris, fell under direct Nazi rule. This was a brutal, uncompromising occupation, characterized by military control, economic exploitation, and a constant, pervasive atmosphere of fear and surveillance. The swastika flew over public buildings. German patrols were a common sight, and life was dictated by the harsh realities of a foreign power. In stark contrast, the southern portion of France, stretching from the Loire Valley down to the Mediterranean coast, was permitted to maintain a semblance of autonomy. This was the birth of the Vichy regime, a puppet government established under the leadership of Marshal Philippe Pétain, a revered hero from the First World War. Pétain, an aged figure of immense prestige, convinced himself and many others that he was acting in France's best interests, protecting it from worse depredations by cooperating with the Germans. The capital of this free zone was the quiet spa town of Vichy, far from the direct presence of German troops, giving it an initial deceptive air of independence. However, The reality of Vichy was far darker than its carefully constructed facade. It was a regime deeply complicit in the atrocities of the occupation. A government that actively collaborated with its German masters. One of the most heartbreaking and enduring stains on its legacy was its role in the systematic rounding up of Jews. French police, under orders from Vichy, participated in the mass arrests of Jewish men, women, and children, both French citizens and foreign refugees. These innocent souls were then handed over to the Nazis, destined for the death camps in the East, a horrific journey from which few would return. This act of complicity revealed the true moral bankruptcy of the regime, proving that its autonomy was nothing more than a convenient veil for monstrous deeds. Amidst this profound national humiliation and collaboration, the spirit of France, though deeply wounded, was not entirely extinguished. A small, resolute handful chose a different path, refusing to accept the defeat or the collaboration. Led by an exiled general named Charles de Gaulle, they fled to London, establishing the Free French Forces. From foreign soil, de Gaulle broadcast defiant messages of resistance, urging his countrymen to continue the fight. Within France itself, clandestine networks began to form, brave individuals and small groups, operating in the shadows, engaged in acts of sabotage, intelligence gathering, and underground journalism. This was the birth of the French resistance, a movement that would grow in strength and significance as the war progressed. Yet, for the vast majority of the French population, open resistance was not an option, or even a possibility. Most simply endured. They navigated the daily realities of occupation and scarcity, striving to protect their families, to find food, to keep their children safe. They did so in silence, with quiet dignity, and often with a heavy heart. Their endurance was not a sign of acceptance, but of a deep, painful struggle for survival. They dreamed of liberation, but for now, they simply lived through the long, dark days, waiting for the dawn that would eventually come, a dawn that would finally reunite their fractured nation. As we gently bring our journey to a close, reflecting on the profound collapse of France in 1940, it's natural to seek understanding, to ask the quiet question, why the answer? As the annals of history whisper to us, is not simple, nor is it a story of material inadequacy. It wasn't a critical lack of guns or tanks or soldiers that brought France to its knees. Indeed, on paper, France possessed a formidable army, comparable in many aspects to that of Germany. The reasons for its swift and devastating defeat lie deeper, in the subtle currents of doctrine, psychology, and the unfortunate confluence of unforeseen circumstances. One of the most fatal miscalculations, a strategic error of immense proportion, was the decision to leave the Ardennes undefended, or at least significantly underdefended. The belief that this rugged, forested terrain was impassable became a self-fulfilling prophecy of vulnerability. It was a blind spot, a chink in the armor that the Germans, with their daring and innovative approach, ruthlessly exploited. The very assumption of its impenetrability became its most significant weakness, allowing the enemy to bypass the mighty Maginot Line, rendering its vast strength irrelevant to the decisive battles. Furthermore, France's response to the unprecedented speed and dynamism of the Blitzkrieg was characterized by rigidity and a crippling slowness. Accustomed to the deliberate, methodical warfare of the First World War, the French military was unable to adapt quickly enough. Instead of launching rapid, fluid counterattacks against exposed German flanks, As opportunities arose, they adhered to a doctrine of slow, planned defensive maneuvers. The time lost in dithering and debate, in trying to fit a lightning war into an outdated framework, proved catastrophic. The critical moments, those fleeting windows of opportunity, simply vanished, leaving a trail of lost chances and escalating disaster. Perhaps most profoundly, the fall of France was a story of a collapse of morale, an insidious erosion of the will to fight. The initial shock of the Ardennes breakthrough, the relentless terror of the Stukas over Sedan, and the bewildering speed of the German advance, all combined to create an atmosphere of profound psychological defeat. When soldiers feel constantly outmaneuvered, when their leaders seem paralyzed by indecision, and when the enemy appears unstoppable, the instinct to surrender, to simply give up in the face of overwhelming odds, can tragically take root. This wasn't a universal sentiment, of course, and many fought with incredible courage, but the collective spirit of resistance, that vital spark of national defiance, was profoundly shaken. Finally, the fractures within the Allied coalition, the deep-seated distrust and the inability to act as one cohesive unit, played a significant role. The lack of unified command, the competing national interests, and the communication breakdowns meant that even when tactical successes were achieved, like at Arras, they could not be effectively leveraged into strategic advantage. The Allied forces, though numerically strong, lacked the synchronized rhythm and shared purpose needed to counter a unified and determined enemy. In the quiet reflection of history, it becomes clear that in 1940, French soldiers did not fall simply because the German panzer was an unstoppable machine. They fell because their nation, steeped in the proud traditions of the past, had already lost the will to effectively fight a war that had fundamentally changed. It was a complex tragedy born of strategic oversight, doctrinal inflexibility, and a heartbreaking erosion of collective spirit. The echoes of those fateful days still whisper through the fields and forests of France. A gentle, yet powerful, reminder of how fragile even the strongest nations can be when faced with the unexpected, and how critical it is for a people to adapt, to unite, and to never lose the will to stand. And perhaps, somewhere in that quiet landscape, the shadows of those who endured still linger, a testament to the quiet strength of the human spirit. But that, my friends, is a story for another night. For now, let the quiet calm of this historical reflection guide you into a restful slumber. Good night.